Hello and welcome to this conversation about leadership, AI and innovation in education. I'll introduce my guest in a moment, but I'm Jamie. I'm the executive chairman of a leading Google partner known as C Learning. We're digital transformation specialists, and I have the privilege to work with leaders who use technology to have great impact in what they do. And I help them to establish credibility as leaders in their field. And I have the privilege to work with some amazing organizations like Google and the RAF and some of the world's top universities and colleges, one of whom I'm delighted to introduce today because I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Bryony of Coleg Sir. Bryony, do you want just to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. So my name is Bryony Evett Hackfort, and I'm from Coleg Sir, Coleg Ceredigion, which I usually describe as you get to Swansea and then you keep just going a little bit more and then you find us in southwest Wales. And if you hit the coast, you've gone too far, come back just a little bit. So I'm the Director of Teaching, Learning and Education. So my remit covers anything T&L, professional learning, digital pedagogy and higher education as well.
Wonderful. And it's great to be talking to you today, Bryony. And I can also say, having visited your organization many times over the years, it's a beautiful part of the world. And
yeah, we're lucky.
Yeah. And I do love your organization as well, because as we've talked about many times over the years, I think your culture is a bit different. And you've been quite instrumental in shaping and crafting that, in my opinion, from the outside looking in, but also having spent some time with you guys. Maybe we'll dig into a bit of that maybe later on, depending on how the sort of discussion goes. But I want to kick it off really with a few sort of open-ended kind of discussion points, really. And knowing you as I do, and I think you're quite an inspirational leader, actually, and I think you do some extraordinary work. And on that point, I was just wondering whether you can recall anything in your sort of career to date, maybe early on in your career, that was really sort of shaped your approach to leadership and really influenced you. Is there anything that sort of springs to mind around that that kind of topic?
Yeah, so when I had a little think about this, I wanted to go with my gut reaction. I wanted to go with the thing that came to my mind first.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's something I've thought about quite a few times since the thing happened. I'm making it sound really mysterious. It's not. But actually, something that happened a long time ago has really, really been quite pinnacle in where I am today. So I'm very happy to share. So I was in a situation where I was in a meeting and the most important person in the room did something that I didn't agree with. And I was not anywhere near the high ranks in that room. I wasn't in senior leadership at that time. I was very new into a middle management role.
Right.
And yeah, I didn't agree with a particular value in the way that something was handled. I didn't at that time, in the there and now, the moment in which it happened, I didn't have the skill set within me at that point to do something at that moment. But it really ate at me. It ate at me a long time after. And actually, there was another particular meeting, same group, coming up in a couple of months after that. And I decided to challenge it publicly on the meeting. It was online, so that made it infinitely more kind of, I don't know, I felt quite vulnerable being online because obviously I'm quite a physical person. I'm quite expressive in my body language and that's a big part of how I like to communicate. So, you know, whittling you down to a small thumbnail is quite challenging. And it was the chair that I was challenging. So I went on with my piece of paper. I'd written what I wanted to say. And the meeting was about 2.5 hours long, and I'd prepared to say this in AOB. That's what I was building up to. And the whole meeting, I was convincing myself, I can't do this. I can't do this. No way I can do this. This is ridiculous. What are you doing? You are just this is not significant. Just leave it go. I couldn't. And so we got to AOB and someone said, is there any other business? And I'm like, oh my God, like I felt so sick. I tell you,
oh my gosh,
so sick. Popped my little hand up and went, yes, I do. And proceeded to read my piece that challenged the value and challenged what I thought was not acceptable. And as soon as I'd done, I muted, turned my screen off, cried.
Oh, wow.
Because I was just this just took so much out of me. And then somebody else on the call privately messaged me and they said, you need to put your camera back on. You did a great job. And the amount of support I got from people who I didn't really know, was I kept all the emails, and it was that moment after that, once I'd had a sleep, and I'm quite an emotional type, so I carried that weight of that, weighing up what to do for 3 months. And it was after that, and I was just like, no, you can do leadership. You can do it. So it wasn't one of these, oh, I heard so and so, or I saw so and so. It was just a moment where I just really felt I had to stick to my guns, and I had to see it through. And I know that I would have been disappointed in myself if I hadn't done it.
Wow.
So that's my moment. It's nothing kind of.
No, that's awesome. Oh, no, that is just awesome. And it's very generous of you to share that so openly as well. Because those moments are really pivotal, aren't they? And actual fact, listening to you then, Bryony, I can relate to that even from a relatively recent example, actually.
Yeah.
I found myself in a position not that long ago where someone that I greatly admire, so in this particular context, it was a very, very high profile person I greatly admire and have had a long-term respect for. And I think this person is wonderful, asked me to step up and do something that would have been a very significant role. And it's the first time in all the time I've known that person, I said no to them. And I said no for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
And this person was a little bit stunned at first because it was not maybe what they were expecting. And I explained why it was no. And it was for lots of both personal and professional reasons. And even though it's difficult, isn't it, when you have to do these things because a lot of emotions involved.
It's hugely emotional.
But you know what? This person dropped me a note afterwards that was really important to me. They dropped me a note shortly afterwards that said, in all the years we've known each other, that's the first time you've ever said no to me.
Yeah.
He says, and I want to just let you know how much I respect you for doing that. And I thought, it really hit me even more then, now my example was more of a sort of nice example, I suppose, in some ways, because your example is more of I think a much more difficult one, because you were effectively speaking truth to power.
Yeah. And I think for me, it gave me an insight into kind of what that term means, and it the way I was very particular in how I wanted to feed back how I felt. I didn't want it to be targeted. I didn't want it to be anything other than me observing what I saw and saying, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not how I think this room should run. And I'm weirdly proud of it. It's not something, I have to be honest, other than the people in the room at that time, no one else knows it happens. So it's not something that I've ever shared before, really. It's just, but it is the thing. When I sat back and said, what's that moment? That is the one that comes to mind,
Wow, that's so cool. And I think that will feed into some of the things we'll move on to later in the conversation as well, about actual examples of leadership that you've led in your organization and how you've gone about that. And on the same sort of theme, I would be really interested in your definition, or your how you would explain what you deem to effective leadership to be. So, from your perspective, how would you define effective leadership? What do you think really effective leadership means?
It's a really complex question, isn't it? Because different scenarios need something different. But if you start to, in different industries and different challenges need different types of leadership, if we talk theoretically about leadership. But actually, if you pin it down to something, what do they all need? And for me, that's a vulnerability. That's a willingness to say, actually, I'm not sure. What do you think? Or to say, I'm not sure I got that right. Actually, I'm sorry. Can we come together and can we figure out another way to do this? Or for someone to not be afraid to go, I don't have that expertise, but you do. And I'd really love to work in a way that gives you the breadth and space to be able to realize that. And I think in most of the times when I'm in a situation where I'm frustrated as not a senior leader, but as a person in a team where someone's being led, when that vulnerability is not there, I find that very difficult. I don't know, is that emotion? I think it's about people. I think it's about, at the end of the day, we've all got to-do lists. We've all got the pressures. And actually the one thing we can do for each other is just champion one another. So again, maybe that's a little bit of a woolly answer, but
No,
I
it's great.
like it when somebody is prepared to put their heart on their sleeve.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, and I'll come back to that thing about. I'm going to ask you a question in a minute that actually very directly relates to what you were just saying. It's about a time when you might have changed your mind about a significant decision you'd made and how you dealt with that. And you were just touching upon some of that just now. But before I dig into that question with you, I can totally relate to the other elements of what you're describing there as well. And I think there's a certain thing that you might describe as vulnerability as well in this, in the sense that I was asked by a leader at Google not long ago, someone I greatly admire again, a chap called Simon, and we were talking about things that we find difficult or fears we have, so to speak. And he asked me what I was afraid of, and I said, actually, that's a really good question. And my biggest fear is letting people down.
Yeah.
So I don't know why, but I have this deep-rooted thing about letting any people down. Like if I ever let you down, for example, as in our relationship of working together, I'd feel devastated by it, like on a very personal level, and it would keep me awake, sort of thing. And I'd have to put it right. And he said something to me that stayed with me forever. Right? He looked at me and he said, "Jamie, you've got to understand, you are going to let me down, and you know what? That's okay, because I am going to probably let you down too." And that's okay too, he said. And he just said this statement, and I've been thinking about it ever since, about the fact that he made it okay. He sort of like made me really reflect on the fact that we can't help sometimes about letting other people down, because that's life.
Well, and it's going to make you braver. It's going to make you braver and to be more confident to step out of the comfort zone. If you know, actually, if that does go into a place where potentially that might be the consequence, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think my observation of you as well, and the leadership culture and approach that you have in what you do, and all the time I've known you, is very much about creating a safe space to be like that. And I do think there's something very special about that, because it's not that common. And the reason it's relevant to this whole conversation about technology and leadership, and AI we'll come on to in a bit, is because I think, from working with organizations all over the world, I have this privilege of observing organizations in many different countries that are doing great things. I actually think a common theme is that you kind of have to have that if you're going to be successful. The command and control approach just doesn't kind of work.
No, it doesn't.
I don't know if it ever worked, but it certainly doesn't work in the 21st century.
100%. And you'll never be stronger for that style. You know, I was a big fan of Elizabeth Warren when she was running, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not saying this correctly, but roughly she said something along the lines of, we all do better when we all do better. And I really love that philosophy. You know, that is about a collective of people working on their own strengths to be better, and that there just can't be an alternative argument in my mind to that.
I know I totally agree. My next question is perhaps a bit more specific, but it just relates to the previous point we were talking about being sort of vulnerable. And is there any particular instance that you can refer to where you changed your mind about a big decision you'd made, and how that felt and how you went about it? Because I think on this topic that we're exploring, I do think it's an essential criteria for success, actually. A previous chief executive of the company WD-40, who many people know, he's somebody that I know, and he was very, very good at creating a culture where he very openly did that in the WD-40 company. He would openly say, actually, do you know what? I was wrong about that. I'm going to change this approach. How do you do that in terms of how you work? And is there any particular time that springs to mind when you did do that, and that you can recall?
Yeah, I think probably an example to share is around, I suppose, when you do change your mind, is you've got to respond to the evidence base that's in front of you. And I think that's the thing, you know, if the evidence, if the discussion, if the feeling is telling you you've made the wrong decision, you don't lean into that even more. You have to listen to it, and you have to examine it. And a nice example, when we went into lockdown right at the beginning, we had at that time, we were obviously developing a way to carry on. And so we went straight into online teaching. Literally straight after that Easter, we went from nothing to full timetable. Our approach was business as normal, which, you know, we can pick that apart another time, but that was what we went with. And it was cameras on. The decision I made, cameras on. That's what we want. That's what we're going for. And a member of staff went away and did beautiful piece of work, which we actually ended up calling Cameras On, Cameras Off, and kind of brought an evidence to get based together and completely changed my thinking of the role of a camera in online learning. And we changed it. We changed it from then. And that was difficult because obviously you pin your colours to the mast, don't you? You stand up publicly and you say, this is what I think. And then it's like, how do you walk that back? And I think what you've got to not focus on, easier said than done, is, you know, it's not about saving face. It's not about ego. It's not about, you know, sort of trying to, well, what I actually meant was, you go, no, I was wrong. I was wrong. I think if you can say you're wrong, God, the world's your oyster if you can say you're wrong, I reckon.
Well, I agree. I couldn't agree more. I think part of that is because if you can do that, you're always learning, aren't you?
100%.
And open-minded is such a key part of that. And totally echo that.
Well, then she went on to do her work, then got published, you know, from that, you know, for her, then she went on this massive, amazing journey of having her work in intuition and that kind of thing. And that's just brilliant for me. Wonderful. That was just such a lovely, this is where we started. This is where we got to. And that was, again, you know, we might touch on it later, why culture of curiosity is so important, because that member of staff went, I'm not sure that's right. And because of the framework and the culture, she was able to go away and say it.
100%. Brilliant stuff. Let's dig a bit. There's something I want to dig into now around motivation and vision. We both know on this call how challenging education can be, the hours that you can put in, the complexities of the pressures and the multi-agency elements to that, because it's not just the pressures of normal managerial pressures in education. Of course, you've got lots of external pressures as well, whether that's different stakeholders from government to quality assurance agencies and lots of other things. So very high pressured, very, very difficult job, and not to mention one of the most important jobs in the world, if not the most important one, in my opinion. In that context that I've just outlined, how do you personally maintain, because you're always so enthusiastic and you're always sort of and you can't always be, there's got to be some time where it's like everything's going wrong. How do you always keep such positivity, motivation? And also, I believe you've always had in all the time I've known you, you've always had a real clarity of purpose about what you're about, which makes you a very, I think, awesome person in education. So how do you maintain that? So for people who may be struggling, because there's a lot of people struggling right now. There's a real retention problem, as you know.
Yeah, there is massive.
How do you find your way through it? Because you're doing better than most.
Probably the answer is got 2 points to it. One, I genuinely love it. I genuinely get such a kick out of the pressure. I enjoy not knowing what my day is going to be like. I enjoy something coming into my inbox and me going, okay, right. What do we do here? So there is, and I do have a natural energy and motivation, but I think that is connected to, it's connected to that love and joy of working in this type of fast-paced. I get a kick out of a fast-paced environment. I want to feel like, in fact, when I struggle is if I don't feel challenged. If my brain gets a chance to slow down, that's when I start to struggle as a leader. I do always need to feel like, you know, when I worked in the performing arts, it's quite funny. So I used to direct, and so before a show had come to an end, so we'd go into opening night and we'd have a run for a couple of weeks, I was already directing the next piece, you know, once the show had opened, boom, gone, you know. And there's strengths and weaknesses to that too. The other thing, again, it's one of these, I really wanted to respond to these thoughts with what came to my gut, and this is the other one that came to my gut. I remember being in school, being taught by some miserable teachers. And I remember saying to myself when I went into teaching, the day I don't enjoy it is the day you get out, because you are the gateway of the next generation. And if you can't bring your A game to those people, you cannot be in that room. And again, you know, family life, mortgages, all the financial commitments, all the other things that keep us in the work, that we do, all those things. you cannot stand in the way of someone's potential in their life. And if you don't enjoy it, if you're miserable, if you don't feel inspired to go and do something a bit different and you're just rolling out the same stuff, you are doing a disservice to that individual who's got one shot. They're in that room for that one shot. And so, yeah, so I do remember saying that. I've always lived by that mantra. The day I don't enjoy it is the day I get out.
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount to be said for that. And we're very, very aligned on our perspectives on this, because of course I often have said to people, I don't feel like I've ever had a job, because I think if you love what you're doing, like I can't even remember like ever thinking on a Sunday, oh, I've got to go to work tomorrow, you know.
I don't have Monday issues. Like,
no.
Like, oh my God, it's Monday. I'm like, okay.
No, but I'm also not blind to the fact that I am aware of the world around me, and the fact that the vast majority of the world doesn't necessarily feel that way.
I know.
And that
as somebody who's positive can be really challenging in a leadership space, when you want to come in and troubleshoot and you want to do something new. So I do rock up with new ideas a lot. That is that's what I like to do. I like to come in and go, hey, why don't we do this? And then I want to run with it. I want to try and do it and bring it to life. And because there are individuals that aren't in that same space for lots of reasons, you have to, I think, as you get more of a seasoned leader, you have to be mindful of that, and how your energy and motivation can sometimes be a challenge in the leadership space as well. So it's brilliant, but it can also be a bit much.
But on that, one of the things I think that you do particularly effectively, which we'll dig into now a little bit, about how you make decisions and the framework that you sort of put around that, is you seem to chart a course that enables you, in all the time I've known you, to create this safe space where people can feel free to innovate, but without losing focus on the vision and where you're actually trying to get to. You seem to do that very, very effectively. And I suspect some people maybe watching this might be quite interested to know your thoughts and insights on what guides your strategic decision-making process. Because in all the time I've known you, you've been leading big things, whether that's cultural change and people or technology, which we might dig into in a bit. But you seem to have been very, very effective at that. And so what's your thought process? What's your strategic sort of decision-making process about leading sort of big change in the decision-making process itself?
So I think very, very early on in leadership and sort of managerial positions, I think a lot of it was that gut and natural motivation. And then I underwent a period of leadership coaching with somebody who taught me the art of why. And to this day, honestly, Jamie, that session with you was a moment which, from every single decision, every single idea, every single strategy that I bring to the table now is rooted in a why. And if the idea or decision or proposal doesn't stand up to the original why, that's the benchmark. And that, you know, and again, very much in the digital space, that's really helped me to hold on to what I wanted. So for Culture of Curiosity, I wanted staff to have a voice. So yes, I wanted all the other lovely bits that come with that, but actually what did I want is it, regardless of publications, regardless of all the different lovely things, I just wanted someone to be able to say, actually, Bri, I don't think we're doing that right as a college and we need to change it. That's what I wanted. For me, digital, maybe we talk about it a bit more later. You know, after that coaching process, I knew that my digital drive was around equity of access. That's my goal. So when I'm looking at things that are brought to me, rather than getting into that overexcited magpie, which I can get a little overexcited, magpie about all these amazing things. Now I can go, does that enhance equity of access? Does that fit into what we're trying to do in this space? Does it block it potentially? Does it detract from actually what we're trying to do? And I don't get it right all the time, but I'm learning, and I suppose I'm still quite a new leader, really. I'm still learning the skill and strength to stick to your original why. But yeah, 100%. It's a safety. And if you can share that why with those that you're working with, it's a commonality, you know.
Yeah, 100%. It's a sort of tangential but related point in that some research I was looking at not long ago by one of the big consultancy firms was basically demonstrating that the data shows that there's an increasing body of evidence to show that those organizations that are values driven and purpose driven will outperform any that have, say, a purely profit motivation in this century.
Yeah.
And they also prove to be more resilient during times of recession or hardship as well. And I guess anyone who's been in a leadership position can probably relate to that, because if ever you faced a challenge when you're in a leadership position, I always think privately, I haven't really shared this publicly before, but but in the spirit of sharing, it's just you and me and whoever ends up watching this. I've always thought that one of sort of my personal tests of leadership is that if something is challenging, so a problem occurs or there's a challenge to overcome suddenly, I think you're doing it all right if you don't need to ask people around you to suddenly mobilize and help you with that particular thing. And I've always kind of been blessed to be around people like that. I actually had an example in the last 24 hours where somebody totally changed his schedule and worked until midnight last night to help me out with something I was working on today that had happened due to no lack of planning on our behalf. It was just a client needed something very urgently. And we wanted to help. And I'm around people who sort of mobilize and do things like that. And I've always thought that around sort of leadership, there's a sort of measure around that, around sort of, and again, it's culture and people, isn't it? But you sort of nicely segued in what you were just talking about there into something I want to move into now a little bit more about, I suppose, some of the innovations and maybe even as it relates to technology as well, because in all the time, again, that I've known you, you've led very innovative projects, and I know you're doing some exciting things around AI. And I don't think it's in fact, I think it's a legal requirement for any conversation that happens now. You have to mention AI.
You do.
I think it's a law now that it's like AI and
then you have to nod like you know what you're talking about. Yes, AI.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the most broad term as well, isn't it? I've got all manner of thoughts on. We'll see where we get through this conversation. We could probably do a whole session just on AI. But since we mention it now, I sort of wonder what your thoughts are on, from a very wise leader sort of perspective. How do you balance risks when introducing sort of very disruptive innovations like AI and technology innovations? Because it seems to me you do this very wisely and very intellectually in terms of how you go about it, and therefore you get the cultural sort of payoff, so to speak. Anything you want to share around your approach to, I don't want to call it risky innovations, but emerging technologies and things like AI, for example? What's your approach been around AI, and sort of how have you thought about the risks in that? Because you already mentioned about equity of access and things being very, very important to you, and I know it is, going back to when we first knew each other. So that's been a common theme that you've been very, very passionate about. How do you balance the risks around that sort of stuff?
So genuinely, this is not planned, but that question around when you've done something wrong and you need to own it and take a step back to jump forward, this fits completely into that. So when we had that November where ChatGPT was suddenly this very visible language model that everybody was getting excited about, and everyone was getting, this tool and terrified of, and all of those other things, we got it wrong. Jamie, we got it wrong. I was leading a team and we got overexcited. We got magpie. We were saying, this tool and that tool, and throwing out this and throwing out that, and not resting on anything. And before we knew it, we weren't doing any AI because we completely burned ourselves out. We turned ourselves upside down by not having any sense of what we were going to do with all this new exciting stuff. And I made a decision. So that was the November to January. In 3 months, or 2.5 months, and that with a 2-week holiday, we burnt ourselves out because we did it wrong. We did it wrong. So I made a decision in February to just stop. Went right, stop. This is ridiculous. We are going to miss out on something because we're not processing what this actual thing, or what we know of it at this stage is. So I decided, when there were lots of hares running off down the track, I decided to be a big fat tortoise and just went, just slow it right down.
Excellent.
And I decided that we were going to have a structure to how we looked at new tools, and to have kind of a 2-tier approach, whereby in terms of the wider organisation of our college, we would attach ourselves to 3 or 4 tools to invest ourselves in, to learn, to get comfortable and confident with. Now, in the background, we can get overexcited and magpie as much as we wanted, but that was a separate piece of work. And as things became tried and tested, then we took it from the innovation team and moved it into the central college. And that has been the last 3-4 years, really. You know, we selected 4 tools, and we went for tools that were not, I really was passionate at the beginning about people learning open source. That just really mattered to me. I don't know, my gut was telling me, get them to learn how to use open source, because then they can choose the platforms that they want to engage with. And, you know, if they find a piece of software, because there was lots of people sharing a lot of things, lots of license, all these things, magical, wonderful things. But as an institute college, you can't buy them all. You just can't. Sure. And I felt that when we were getting it wrong in that first 2.5 months, people were getting frustrated because we were getting people excited about a tool, and then they wanted us to buy it and we couldn't. So we invested in a couple of tools. And those tools, it was really important. If we were going to culturally move forward as an institution, there's no point in that working just for teachers. It had to be for everybody in the organisation. And we stuck to that from the outset. So we picked tools that would suit people regardless of job role. Taught them the skill of interacting with AI in an open source environment, learning about it in that way. And just we went steady. I'm not ashamed to say that. You know, a lot of people I think want to sell the big snazzy stuff they did, and we just went steady. And I'm really proud of where we are. I mean, we were the first institution in Wales to write a policy. When everyone was sticking away from it and going, no, we're not writing any AI policy, just leave it go. And it's kind of funny because we're on version 3 now, and I've just started writing version 4. And I look at version 1, I'm like, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about this thing.
Well, I think that's very healthy what you're saying there, because I attended just after, it wasn't long after ChatGPT had launched, actually. We were at an event at the House of Lords, and there were some amazing people there speaking, like Lord Jim Knight and people like that. And then one person stood up and said, well, isn't it amazing? Who would have thought just a year ago that the world was full of AI experts? and I thought, yeah, that is so true. You know, you get this with any disruption, don't you? But I love that point you were making just now about getting overly excited about technologies and some of the ways that can have unintended consequences in terms of creating inertia, actually. Because I always think that, you know, the really smart people, actually, it seems to me, are those that are looking at the optics much further down the road and really taking the time to think, well, actually, what does this really mean for us?
Absolutely. What problem is that thing going to solve for us as an organisation? How is it going to improve someone's equity of access? How is it going to improve somebody's learning experience or somebody's, you know, day job? And that's, we came at it from a very functional position. We still got very excited, of course. You know, that it's very difficult to erase that natural instinct, but in order to do the service to the people that, you know, we are leading, we were duty bound to make it accessible for everybody. And that's driven everything that we do in the AI space. I mean, one of the things right in the early days when we were looking at those adopters and who was keen, who was eager, and then the people who were like, just Bri, don't, and would turn around in the corridor and walk the other way to avoid a conversation about it. What I wanted to tap into right at the beginning, so obviously the biggest risk is non-engagement, and the reality is that's not an option. It's just not. Regardless of what your preference is, if you work in education, you're going to have to engage with it. You're going to have to work around a little bit in terms of what your personal philosophies might be, because it will be in your classroom. So you have to have a working knowledge of it. So I tapped into what I felt were the 2 biggest fears by our staff right across the board, which was that it was going to replace jobs and it was going to replace learning. those were the two big things that when I was listening to people right at the beginning, that's what they were telling me. Yeah, well, soon you won't need teachers, you know, and well, they're just not going to learn anything, are they? If, you know, AI can just spit out an essay.
Yeah.
So very early on, I got a strapline, which was enhancement, not replacement. So for AI, that is my why. So
yeah,
again, whenever we're making decisions about what we're bringing into our organization and approaches and methods we want to take, I go back to, is this enhancing or is it replacing? Now, that's not to say future opportunities to develop things that might, you know, take us down a different path. You know, that might still happen, but ultimately our core is it's enhancement, not replacement.
Yeah, makes absolute sense, and what a great mantra to have as well. And I think that's really true. I'm seeing that already, and I think it's really important as well that we keep that balance of that relationship in exactly as you describe it. You know, it's like that old quote about technology makes a great, you know, slave but terrible master. And I think as long as we understand that we're in charge of it, it's not being done to us. Because I think it can feel sometimes in education like all this stuff is being done to you, like you must use AI, you know. And that just isn't the case. And I think we've also got to remember that we are creating what AI becomes. You know, it isn't a predetermined set path. It's going to become this thing. It's what we make it. And I'd like people to feel a bit more empowered personally around that. And I know you do this really, really well, but I just wanted to just touch on one point before we move on to sort of a bit more about how you empower collaboration in different ways. Just on that, you were just talking in detail a few moments ago about sort of the decision-making processes around how you decide how you're going to go about things. How much data do you use in terms of informing your decision-making processes, and especially around driving digital equity or AI adoption? Are you very data heavy in terms of how it informs your decision making processes?
I love this because data and I have a complex relationship. Right?
I think it does with everyone.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Right. I know this is flowery, and I love the story. I love the narrative, and I love identifying impact in a way where it's just a small little moment where perhaps if something amazing's happened and a staff member's walking with their head a little bit higher. But I do recognize as I move further into senior leadership that there is this emphasis on using that evidence base, you know, which is absolutely key, and you can't change that. It is essential. I think for me with data, I'm actually doing a piece of research at the moment where I'm looking at our culture of curiosity, which impact measures connected to that are very much about the narrative. They are about the story. And I am looking at what data could be connected to that in order to satisfy those that need the data to say that it works. So that's been really interesting. But for me, I think how I like to use data is it's just one viewpoint. You know, it's the starting point maybe to then dig deeper than the data that you've got in front of you to look at, right, okay, well, what's the context of this number in front of me? What's forming that? Who are the people behind it? And when what's leading that data? Because, you know, data can give you a lot, but it can hide a lot too.
Yeah.
And I think it's how do you learn to walk that line so that you don't make assumptions based on what you think the number either is or isn't telling you. So data, we have a complex relationship. We're learning to work together. But I kind of like that I have a complex relationship with it.
I think it's very healthy because I mean, data literacy, if I can call it that, is a key skill. And of course, data can tell you some things, but also it can misrepresent things as well.
100%.
And it also doesn't always capture, it can't always capture the story and much wider things as well. I've been in many boardrooms actually where if the decisions made were just based on the data, then very, very fallible decisions would have been made, including some really quite important things. And so I think it only tells part of the story.
Exactly. And I think as well, you know, you come back to that notion of the human at the center of an organization. We're talking about people. If you only go on the data, you then are devoicing people. You have to have it as an element to your work, not necessarily the be all and end all.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned just now, a few minutes ago, about your culture of curiosity, which is something I'm very familiar with in terms of your work at the college there, which has always fascinated me about your work around the culture of the organization, because you have always placed a huge emphasis ever since I've known you on people, which I think is really, really important. What inspired you originally about that, in terms of what or who inspired you originally to champion culture of curiosity in your organization the way you did? Because you've really done that so exceptionally well in your organization. I was just curious as to what inspired you, or was it nothing? Maybe it wasn't a moment or anything, but is there anything that you want to share about what inspires you around that?
In the workplace, I'm very lucky to have an incredible mentor, and she happened to be my line manager when I got my first managerial post.
Oh, wow.
And she had been evolving this new approach to teaching and learning a period of years before I got into post. And I remember her talking to me and saying, "What's next?" And I remember feeling so liberated by somebody saying to me, "What's next? Where do we go now?" It was, and I can still remember where we had that conversation, and that faith and trust in me to be able to bring something to the space that was something I believed in was huge. And to this day, I mean, when I attempt with leading others, that's what I try to do, is to allow them to come to the space first with what they want to bring, and then we shape it together. And so the curiosity, the research element, is that I knew I wanted our staff to have agency over their own thinking, and I wanted them to have power over their own thinking and to recognize their own mastery, which in FE typically people, because of trajectory into FE, where often people have come from lots of different spaces and routes and sort of pathways in, there can be that feeling, well, I can't do research because I've not done HE, or I've never written before. And I thought, what's a way that we can get those people not thinking about that? Everyone's experimenting. If you teach a lesson and it doesn't go right, and you leave that room and go, "Oh well," well then there's bigger problems there. But most don't. Most leave going, "I'm not doing it like that again." And that, for me, it was capturing that. That's what I wanted to capture. And I just knew that action research felt right. It felt the thing that we wanted to do. And I am proud, because lots of people are talking about it, but we were doing it really early. Back in 2018, our culture of curiosity started. And at the beginning, I didn't have any language around what that was and what I was doing. I just knew I wanted something where there was kind of two perspectives. I wanted, if you ask a staff member, what do you want? They want to be trusted. They want to be allowed to make mistakes. And if you ask leadership, do you allow your staff to do that? But yeah, but not too many. No, don't do it that way. So I wanted to find a way that they could have that freedom and space, but that the college could have assurance that there was a robust framework around that. And that is how the action research pathway started, which is now evolved into 9 pathways, covering all different things. And I'm really proud it's proper grassroots. It's proper. I remember having some challenging conversations in the earlier days when people wanted to go public with it really early. It's like, no, we've got nothing to go public with yet. We've just got a concept, we've got people dabbling in some research. We haven't got anything to, and I just said, no, we're not going to do it. And I'm very strict that the curiosity has to come from the practitioners. So at no point can there be any directive from above as to what they should be curious about, because you can't tell someone what to be curious about. And that's just a really easy concept you can't argue.
Yeah, 100%. I love so much about what you're sharing there, Bryony. And
I have to be a bit naughty sometimes. I'm a bit rogue.
Just in this conversation, though, there's a couple of things that I know I'll take away from it and be reflecting on later. And one is your constant focus on, you talked at the start of this conversation about your focus on learners and the why, and focusing absolutely, you talked about, you came out with a sentence that was where you were basically alluding to, it's too important about, you've got people's futures in that classroom. It's too important not to get it kind of right. And I love that. And I've also seen you translate that to your colleagues, so your staff as well, and the people around you, as much as the students as well. And you sort of remind me of that quote that I love, where there's a lovely quote, and it goes something like, when I'm talking to a manager, they make me feel like they're important, but when I'm talking to a leader, they make me feel like I'm important. And I see you doing that in the culture that you create in your organization, and I sort of love that. And let me just flip it a little bit now, because we've talked about some wonderful positives in what you were just saying there. You can't be a leader without encountering resistance and occasionally people who might just not want to go down a certain road that an organization's made a decision it's going down. I'm interested in how you handle both resistance, but also what you might call difficult conversations. Anything you want to share with anybody watching this who might be starting off in their leadership career around how you've handled difficult conversations, or people who might be resistant to change in some way? What are your thoughts on that?
So I have this particular thought on difficult conversations, and I don't know if it makes any sense, but it's a little mantra I live by. You sometimes hear people say, oh, I'm really happy to have difficult conversations. Yeah, I don't mind doing that. That's absolutely fine. The day you don't find a difficult conversation difficult, you're not doing it right. For me, that's how I live by, is that if it becomes easy, if it becomes something you can just slot into your day, you're not doing it right. A difficult conversation is that because of the consequences of the thing that you're engaging that individual on, whether it be, something small within a moment or something more significant in their journey within your organization. A difficult conversation is that because it should be, and you should respect that. And that would be some advice I'd give to people coming in. Don't ever feel like you have to get comfortable with them. Respect them. And so I think the biggest thing with people, because there are loads of people, like I said earlier, seen you coming down the corridor thinking, oh, what idea is she bringing now? What's coming now? Just give people the time and space to adjust to what's coming with a sense of ownership over their response to it. Because if you go, right, come on, change now, we're doing this now, that's not going to happen. And it's about I think as well, also not giving up, not steeping into negativity. I always say in teaching and learning, you got to keep going, you got to keep smiling. And when I look for people to join the team, I do look for over enthusiastic people, because often when you are leading innovation, you'll get more no's than yeses, in the main. So when I interview people, I do, if I get any sense from someone that they're going to go into their 8th professional learning session, that still they haven't got everybody, and they're just going to go, oh, well, no, I need someone that will come back next time and go, right, okay, now we're going to try it this way. So relentless sort of persistence that's respectful of change, because people are at all different stages of their career. You think of some of the massive changes we've had recently, where someone's got 2 years out from retirement. You have to think about that as much as thinking about the need for that person to adapt to the change. So we had a member of staff in that position. I was very excited when they voluntarily went on an AI conference. I was like, that's amazing. I was so excited. I was genuinely chuffed a bit. So it's like, that felt really good.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think the point you're making there as well about what you might call resiliency, I suppose. That is so important. A long time ago, I read a book by Bear Grylls, the survival specialist, and he had this line in his book where he says, "Fortune favors the dogged." Those people who will just get up, no matter how bad the day was yesterday. You get up tomorrow, you don't overly dwell on it. You make a success of the present moment and what's in front of you. And I would say that is absolutely true of my experience of coaching and advising so many senior leaders in different roles, is that those people who really ultimately succeed aren't necessarily the ones that had any particular natural advantage or anything, but they were the ones that could keep going and had the resiliency. Because as you know, there must be times, Bryony, in your role as a leader that can feel very lonely. That every single leader knows that they've had or are having moments where they can feel isolated, lonely, like they're not sure how to navigate through a particular problem that they're facing, or that kind of thing. And I think it's those times when you draw on your networks, on your mentors, your coaches, your networks and your friends, pick up the phone. I have that all the time. You know, I'll often be faced with a very complex problem, pick up the phone late on a Friday, whatever, and go, how'd you handle this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those are
really
important to be able to recognize that you can do that. And I think that loneliness is something nobody talks about in leadership.
No, they don't.
And it's funny because actually it's probably at times quite an overwhelming feeling. You know, and I think the further you move up the sort of the leadership sort of, you know, process, the more it stops with you, the lonelier it can get. And I think that is a big learning curve. That's something that you have to not just be, I'm not saying you just need to be okay with it, but it's a factor that you need to decide if you can cope with it, if you can manage it in terms of becoming a leader and not being afraid of it either. Because the reality is, once you do connect with someone, and we'll do it in college sometimes, you'll find you've gone a little bit siloed in your SLT group, and then you'll have a quick conversation with another member of or a peer of your SLT who's feeling exactly the same. And you go, oh, we've got to talk more. Oh, we've got to sit we've got to do this a little bit more. And then you realize it's not just me.
100%. And I think it goes back to one of your earlier points as well, in that I think to get through those times as a leader, it's those leaders who are okay to be vulnerable and open, because you've got to reach out for a hand and go, have you got time for a coffee? I could do with some help or advice or guidance. If you can't do that, and you fall into a trap thinking, I am the leader, therefore I have to be strong, I have to look like I'm in control,
even all the answers.
I have to have the answers, or I have to give confidence even when everything else is on fire. If you're not okay and comfortable being vulnerable like that, I mean, I often describe it in my team as I tell people to get comfortable hugging the cactus. You've got to kind of be comfortable hugging a cactus, because it's going to be difficult. There's going to be time. You've got to be resilient, but you've also got to be vulnerable and open to reach out for help when you need it. And then I think,
and it's okay to find that hard. It's okay. I think there's sometimes this overemphasis on the strength of dealing with challenge in leadership capacity and going, no, I'm fine, I can just deal with it. And actually, it's okay to go, no, that one bit I need to deal with in my week. It's really difficult, and actually, I'm not quite sure what.
100%.
Yeah.
Now you are such a source of wisdom and insights. I could easily keep going to the point at which this recording says you have to stop now. but in the time we've got left, I just want to touch on a couple more discussion points, and then we'll wrap it up, because you've been incredibly generous, as you always are, with your time. I'm interested in sort of your approach to strategic partnerships and how you go about choosing those in terms of, like, especially around technology partners, things like that, because that's sort of how sometimes we interact together, because I know that you do a lot around technology innovation, and you make use of things like Google technologies in the college and stuff like that. But how do you go? What matters to you, I guess, about who you choose to partner with in terms of any ed tech solutions you might bring into the college? You know, what do you look for in a partner? What matters to you? And what sort of decision-making process do you go through as leaders with that? Because leaders in education are bombarded with companies all the time trying to sell you stuff. So how do you go about filtering out those ones that you want to?
Noise.
How do you filter out the noise? Yeah, basically.
How do you filter out the noise? It's values for me. Absolutely values. If someone will take the time to have a conversation with me, we'll find out about what I'm looking for first before telling me about what they have. That is, especially in technology, that will always be the thing that gets me listening first. If it's targeted at a real problem, and that piece of technology is going to offer a potential solution that will improve something for someone, whoever that is, whether it's staff or if it's students, and if that feels like that is rooted in values, that is when I will go, okay, let's have a conversation, you know. And in terms of our people that we do work with, actually in this space digitally, we just have one or two because they're right for us. And I think that's really important, you know, and C-learning has been huge for us in the digital pedagogy space, you know. And I do say a lot of where we are now is because of that building a very genuine relationship between us that has allowed us to have times where we've run at something together and gone with something, and then, you know, there's been times when we've gone, actually no, we're not ready for that yet. But I always know in our partnership that is safe for me to say, and that I feel like, you know, there's no consequence in terms of a negative consequence. You know, sometimes when you're dealing and looking at partners, and if you need to say no, and then you feel like, you know, okay, the line's gone dead, they've moved on to the next person. Never ever felt that with you as a company, and that matters. That really matters. And I love that I can, with the partners, you know, that we work with, I can pick up the phone and go, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. Or I can go, do you know someone who? And I love that the partnership is, I hope, two-way. It, you know, that
100%. Yeah, 100%. I totally love what you're saying about values there as well. And as you know, but for anybody watching this who maybe doesn't know Sea Learning as well as you do, and Sea Learning is just a group of people basically who are all very values driven. And I mean, for me personally, in my role as chairman, I've got my own mentors and coaches, and unfortunately, I lost one of them last year. Someone that you'll know, David Price, and David once shared a quote with me that is again something that just resonates with me so much, and I know it'll resonate with you as well because of who you are as a person and your leadership style. And the quote is an old one, and it goes something like, "What we do for ourselves dies with us, but what we do for others lives on." And I think a lot of educators can relate to that, of course, because educators are amongst the most selfless people you could ever meet. Classic example of that, of course, was you mentioned the pandemic earlier in this conversation. And I often remind people that for me, one of the things I'll never forget about that very strange time in 2020-ish was how social media platforms came alive immediately with educators across the world sharing openly, saying, here to help, have my resources. Have you seen this? Here's some resources online. I still am in awe of that years later. And I just think that's something that I'll never forget about how educators are just, they're extraordinary. You know, I think that for all of the challenges and all the difficulties that we all know happen in education, I know it sounds like a cliche, but it really is just the most incredible job, and the responsibility that goes with it is just the most incredible as well, because you do extraordinary work, and I think you are an exemplar of that, and embody the kind of values that you mentioned. Since you brought up values, I think certainly, you know, from our point of view, you know, partly why I said I don't feel like I've ever had a job is because you can't describe it as a job when you have the joy and the privilege of working with people like yourself and so many of our clients who are just not only doing a job that's very important in itself, but they're inspirational as people themselves. And I do think that's extraordinary. And speaking of inspiration, let's end with a couple of positive things. Let's about the future. Let's turn our gaze to the future now. And what, in your view, Bryony, excites you the most about the future? And I suppose I did say earlier it was the law that we have to talk about AI now in the world. Every conversation. If I was being optimistic about AI, I suppose for a second, what excites you the most about the potential for AI in terms of impacting both inside education but also outside of education? What do you hope for? What's exciting you about the future?
I would love to get to a point in the future where every single person, regardless of their experience with technology, can get something from it and know that they can. I think it's more than know they can get something from it. I am really passionate about detechifying AI, and I think it's amazing. Like, I look in awe at some of the stuff that's happening in the world right now, of people coming up with incredible things in AI and doing phenomenal things, and I learn so much from watching those things. But for me, I feel like my contribution can be in the space where actually in day-to-day roles of people, you know, maybe in administration, NHS, all these different places, that they can get something from it too. And that's absolutely my motivator. So we have very recently created our own AI package, e-learning package, which is designed to detechify. And it's designed for everybody. It's not designed for teachers. So our teachers have done the program, which is really fab. But we have got a local health board that are going to be doing it imminently, which is really exciting. And I'm really proud that it is just about everybody's use of it, not, you know, you've got to have a degree in computer science, or you've got to you know, be particularly interested in a type of anything. It belongs to everybody, and I love that. And I think the four things that I stick to on the future of AI, I really strongly believe in 4 pillars that again I pin all this down to for us. There's a lot of people that when it came out, rightly, understandably, ethics, safety. Yes, of course. But I really believe if you only think about ethics and safety, you'll never innovate. And if you only innovate, you will cross inappropriate boundaries in ethics and safety. So we have 4 pillars. We promote everything equally around ethics, safety, innovation, and efficiency. Those are the 4 things that we think every practitioner, teacher, person, nurse on a ward, whatever, feel comfortable and be able to do in the AI space. Because the reality is, it's in their world already. They may as well make the most of it to the package is designed, as I said, to not, it's not a teaching package, it's for anybody, and just getting people to play around with, your washing machine's broken down and I need to write a complaint letter to the company because they won't listen to me. Well, this is what you do. They can do it for you, things like that. Which kettle do you want to buy? Do you want that one or that one? Well, just chuck it all in here and it'll tell you. So,
and if the audience listening to this wanted to find out more about that, where would you direct them to? Is it something they can publicly
come straight to me? Yeah, happy for my email to be shared. I'm really proud of this piece of work, and I am very excited to get people out there testing it, because the more it's tested, the more I can know if it works or it needs changing. But it is about everyday use, and I'm just really proud of it.
Well, that segues really into what I promise will be my last discussion point of the day, because you've been incredibly generous with your time. But I find your insights, and I'm sure the people listening to this will find your insights so valuable and interesting that I could easily accidentally carry on for another hour. But I'll be abusing our relationship if I do that. So I'm not going to ever do that. So I'm gonna wrap it up now with, and I don't know what to make the final question really, but I think I'm going to settle on, following on from what you were just saying, it nicely segues into, well, if we end by sort of exploring what, in your thoughts, are the kind of skills or attributes that you think education leaders of tomorrow are going to need to best thrive in this AI world that you were just kind of talking about. You sort of touched upon it a little bit just now, but what would be your parting sort of comments really for the leaders of tomorrow in terms of what kind of skills and characteristics and behaviors do you think they're going to need?
Yeah. So my answer to this is really simple. Build a culture and a safe space where people can share what they know, but also share what they don't know. If you can do that, if you can create an environment where people can go, hey, I'm really excited about this. Do you want to come see what I'm doing? And then to also go, I have no idea how this thing over here works. Have you? Do you know what, if you can create that type of environment, then those other skills that sit behind being able to do that will naturally grow. But if you can have people being comfortable in any environment to say what they do, and I always say this about educators, we are the safe space. That we're not the whole AI journey. We're one moment of it. We're the educational part of it. And we have to have an environment where those learners can get it wrong, and that's why I don't like all the ethical plagiarism, cheating talk, because people won't play an experiment to get things wrong, because they'll be fearful of that. And that's why I want our learners to know that they can challenge it with us. They can attempt to identify for themselves what that boundary is, and then we'll help them figure it out. That's what I think is important for us as educational leaders, is to create environments where our staff and our learners, regardless of what your role is, feel that they can share what they know and what they don't know. Yeah.
100%, and what a perfect way to end this conversation. I could easily have carried on digging into you've shared so much wisdom and insights there.
I love it. Thank you.
No, you've been hugely generous, and I'm sure the people listening to this later will share my sentiment when I say huge thanks to you for your generosity. Your openness.
Thank you.
I think you're an inspiration in education. I'm happy to openly say that, and also I think I think it needs to be said also that I still see so much lack of equity in the world around us. It'd be very easy for me to live in a bubble where I think that everything's okay, and that a lot of the problems around equity and equality are solved in this world, but they're not. And I see this all the time still, because I'm not blind to it. And the reason I mention this by way of ending is because I think you're quite an inspiration to future, potentially, in particular, female leaders coming through various systems they might be in, whether they're in education or in a wider sector that might be watching this later. I think we need greater equality in all of its senses, not just gender, but in the context of this, I think there is a long way to go still with female leadership in certain ways. I still go to too many tech conferences, for example, where there's too many men on stage.
Yes.
And I know it's not just about gender. There's lots of other measures.
No, it isn't. But there's a lot of work to be done in that space. Again, for a safe space for people to present themselves equally and not apologetically, which I think sometimes you can sort of in that gender world you can fall into. So I do think that's I do think that's important, and I appreciate you saying that.
Well, I just think I absolute respect to you, because going back to some of your points earlier in this conversation, you have taken risks. You've got great courage in speaking truth to power. You've shown great courage and in my opinion, great leadership in creating those safe spaces for others where maybe they may not have existed before, but you've created that. And I think that's an absolute tribute to your leadership style. This has been an inspiring conversation about leadership, technology, and innovation education. And as ever, absolute privilege to catch up with you, Bryony. And I'll stop the recording now, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.